Hey there, I'm Lemur, and today I want to share with you all what might be my favourite story from across my entire RPG career. It is the story of how a single goblin managed to single-handedly take down the final boss of a module, using nothing but a megaphone and a turtle. How did he do it? Well, I'll tell you. Me and my friends had decided on trying out a module, since even though I'd been running games as a GM for a good few years by then, I'd only ever run games of my own creation, despite pre-written adventures being such a good starting point for most GMs. The module in question was one for 1st edition Pathfinder called We Be Goblins, and on my first quick skim through the pages of it, I could already tell it was going to be the perfect game for us, as the module was styled in such a way that it was great for a fun little one-off adventure, where the players would have the opportunity to play some rather unorthodox characters. The party was made up of, as you may expect, a trio of goblins. These were Chuffy the Rogue, Pook the Cleric, and the star of this particular story, Mogmurch the Alchemist. These were the goblins of the Lictoad tribe, who have a particular request for the goblins of the party. You see, being goblins, they have all sorts of strange elements to their culture, like a burning hatred for specifically dogs and horses, or an overwhelming passion for blowing things up. More on that later. One of these particular pieces of culture was the belief that writing things down steals the words out of your head, so anyone who knew how to read or write must be punished, usually with death. However, there was a goblin nicknamed Scribbleface in the Lictoad tribe that had been found guilty of the crime of writing, and he was promptly exiled from the tribe. When they investigated his hut, however, they found a map that would supposedly lead to the goblin equivalent of the Holy Grail, and by that, I of course mean an enormous stash of fireworks. Now, goblins have a pretty wide range of depictions across all the media they've been in, but the one trait that seems to come up more than any other is a goblin's love of bombs and explosives. And of course, fireworks are no exception, so you can imagine the excitement of the tribe when they learned of this stash. There's just one issue. The stash's location was right in the centre of the territory of a dangerous cannibal named Vorka. Now this is where the players come in, as this trio are the only tribe members brave enough to storm into the home of fearsome Vorka herself. Before they go, however, the chieftain of the Lictos decides that this is as good an excuse as any for a chieftain moot, a type of celebration where the soon-to-be heroes of the tribe get to drink some good drink and play some good games before setting off on their quest. If I may put my narration aside for a moment, I actually think this was an excellent addition to the module. You wouldn't expect a one-shot module to encourage the players to go off and have some silly fun instead of doing the quest, but here the module links in the Goblin games with the adventure itself in a way that was really fun to play through, and it was a real nice change of pace from how most RPG sessions are run. The games themselves were interesting too. They were all themed as dares that the players received from other members of the Lictoads, and ranged from everything from a more aggressive version of hide-and-seek to a game where you have to ride on an excitable pig named Squealy Nord in the same style as a mechanical bull. There was actual reason to do these dares too, the fun of them aside, as for each dare the players successfully completed, they'd receive a neat little magic item to make the actual quest easier. There were pretty good items too. Some of the harder dares even offered things like a magic weapon that makes some of the later combat encounters completely trivial. Now, admittedly my group didn't do quite well enough to get the items of that caliber, but they still managed to pick up a couple of nice little ones to help them along. The cleric managed to get his mitts on a magic ring that could improve one's climbing ability quite drastically, and Mogmurch managed to get his grubby paws on the chief's personal, very useful robe that is useful. The name of the item is a bit of a handful, but really it's just a more goblin-y version of a more common Pathfinder item, one simply called a robe of useful items. The way the item works is it is a robe covered with a small collection of patches, and when one of the patches is removed, some mundane item will be created in the wearer's hand. Most typical robes would create some pretty useful equipment such as a lantern, gold pieces, or even a whole rowboat. However, this being a robe owned by a goblin, the only 4 patches available on the very useful robe that is useful only created a bullhorn, a 10-foot ladder, a single horseshoe, and a 3-legged turtle. At first glance, the only one of use seems like the ladder, but, well, we'll get to their uses later. After the tribe's celebrations had ended, the party set out from the campsite and began to make their way through the marsh directly towards the territory of Vorka. The cannibal's base was quite unique as far as living spaces go, as she'd made her home in an old and abandoned shipwreck that had been carried by a powerful storm into the middle of a swamp, where several thick layers of mud held it upright and in place. Despite it giving the appearance of being abandoned, it was nothing but that, as not only did Vorka live there, her druidic magic had granted her many animals which she kept in a state halfway between pets and hostages. As the party travelled through her ship, they had to fight their way through all sorts of these different types of beasties that Vorka had at her disposal, most of which were dogs and horses as well, the natural enemy of the Lictoad goblins, so of course these fights were filled with goblinoid fury. All in all, these fights wore down the party's health, and the goblin's aggressive nature, roleplayed very well by my players I might add, meant that they spent a lot of their daily resources making sure that these mangy beasts were violently put down. While this strategy had meant that the trio had blitzed through the first few fights, an issue arose when the time came to challenge the big bad herself, Vorka. In the commotion they'd caused fighting Vorka's pets, they'd left no chance at stealth, and had given the cannibal all the time in the world to prepare for the party. As while the players were busy distracting themselves in a shouting match for a particularly grubby canine, Vorka was busy casting enhancing spells to increase her combat ability. From the moment the fight began, Vorka had already had the upper hand, and quite decidedly so. She had greater numbers with her summoned animals, enhancement spells to make herself tougher, and even the home field advantage as she had chosen to attack from a higher area upon the ship. The party fought bravely, but Vorka had the high ground, and had taken to using some of the fireworks in her stash as weapons against the players. It became slowly apparent that this was the party's fight to lose. They simply couldn't keep up with the onslaught of summons, spells, and explosions. With their back against the wall, however, my players started getting desperate, and when people get desperate, they also get creative, and try solutions that they maybe would have never tried otherwise. In the battle so far, the one thing the party had going for them is that they'd brought the Vorka down to their level, as they'd fought their way through enough of Vorka's summons that she had little choice but to fight them herself. And with all of their enemies' summons out of the way, it was time to bring in one of their own. And so in a brilliant gambit of having no other options left, Mogmerch grabbed onto the patch from the useful robe and tore off the patch to summon the three-legged turtle. As a GM, this caught me completely off guard. I was so focused on running the combat encounter I'd totally forgotten about the robe, never mind the turtle patch of all things. So I decided the only appropriate thing to do here was to award the creativity of Mogmerch. So I didn't just give him a turtle with 3 legs, I gave him a giant turtle with 3 legs. I named him Johann, and Johann was a hefty boy. For the level the party was at, having Johann was an utterly huge buff to the party's firepower. In fact, if he got one good chomp in, there was a decent chance he could down Vorka in a single hit. Only problem is, well, he's rather slow, and could only really land a good blow when given a good enough opportunity. It's because of that flaw that even having such a powerful ally on the party side didn't really swing things all too far in their favour, and things were beginning to look even more bleak for them. But there was still a chance, and they kept on fighting, wearing Vorka down just a little bit more. After having such success with the robe, when it next got to Mogmerch's turn, he decided to take off another patch. This time he chose the bullhorn. For clarity's sake, a bullhorn is essentially just ye olde megaphone or loudspeaker. There really wasn't anything special about it. I thought I'd been a bit generous with the turtles, so here I dialed it back a bit and just gave him a totally mundane bullhorn, made of wood of all things too. But Mogmerch held onto it nonetheless. "I have an idea," he said in a much more goblin-like voice than mine. Now combat was reaching its end, it seemed. The party was brought very, very low, and a couple of them had even been downed at a few different moments. One way or another, it seemed that there was very few rounds left, and the players had done little other than whittle away at Vorka. They kept on fighting, though maybe struggling would be a better word for what they were going through. But now it was Mogmerch's turn, and time for that idea of his. I asked him, "Mogmerch, it's your turn. What do you do?" The response was simply, "I'm going to scream," using the bullhorn. We all found this pretty funny as is, so of course I made the GM's fatal mistake. "Roll for it," I said. "Roll to scream." And here, folks, is where Mogmerch rolled his first nat 20 of the entire session. I was stunned. What does a nat 20 scream even mean? There are spells in Pathfinder that do sonic damage using loud sounds, but those are magically loud, not just a goblin screaming loud. After thinking on it a little bit, I ruled that Mogmerch's nasty scream was so damn loud that poor Vorka had to cover her ears in pain. She was stunned and could not act for 1 round. This meant that her turn in combat was skipped, and who would be next to the initiative order but Johann the giant turtle? Johann may be slow, but now his target was immobilized, and, with one mighty crunch, Johann landed his first hit of the entire encounter, a hit so powerful it killed the goblin cannibal in a single chomp. They had won, thanks to Mogmerch's genius. And so, the goblins retrieved their explosive loot, and returned to the Lecto tribe as heroes. The chief of the tribe was so impressed with their haul that he appointed them all titles to show off their prowess. Chuffy was now to be called Chuffy Lickwound, the Great Dog Stabber, as he'd landed many powerful blows against Vorka's mangy hounds. Pug was now to be called Pug of Zarangel, the Boss of Beheadings, as he'd gained a gruesome habit of cutting off the heads of those he'd killed, including what was left of Vorka's. And for Mogmerch, what better title could be given than the Master of the Big Scream? Thank you for watching the video. I hope you liked it, because this story is one of my favourites out of all my Pathfinder games, and I do have more if you're interested. If you could be so kind as to leave a like on the video, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, then subscribing would be a good way to do that. I've got some ideas from some upcoming videos that you do not want to miss. Once again, thank you for watching, and goodbye.